For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order for the purpose of inquiring to the Majority Leader the schedule for the week to come.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I also ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. But before I yield to the gentleman from Maryland, I want to share and join in with him in the tribute that's been paid to our former colleague, John Dingell. I served proudly on the House Energy and Commerce Committee with Chairman Dingell, and what a giant, what a true institutionalist of this House, the longest serving member, a colleague that we will have fond memories and share those fond memories, I'm sure, in the days and weeks to come. But I know, Madam Speaker, and to my colleague from Maryland as well, every time we go into that room, the committee room for the Energy and Commerce Committee, we always get to look up now and know that it is named after our colleague John Dingell, and always remember his wit, because he was tough, but he had a great wit to share along with the combat that you would always get to engage in with him. And I'll always remember when the vote was finally called, he always had his own unique way, as the clerk would be calling the roll of the committee, and they would call a member, and the member would say aye or nay. He would always say, "Dingell votes aye." He would have his unique way of addressing the issue of the day, and we will always remember him. To his wife Debbie and his family, we keep him in our prayers. And with that, I yield to the gentleman from Maryland.
I thank my friend Mr. Scalise, the Republican whip, for his comments. It is a testimony to the love and respect that John Dingell enjoyed in this House from both sides of the aisle. And as I said earlier, Madam Speaker, there's no one in this House that doesn't have a particular story about John Dingell. So before we begin this colloquy, I want to again express my gratitude for the life and service of my friend John Dingell. Madam Speaker, I was with him Wednesday. He died yesterday. I was with him the day before he died. And we sat together for 2.5 hours and talked. And as I left, I leaned down and I kissed him on the forehead and I said, "I love you, John." And I think I was speaking for literally scores of members who worked with him on the committee, who worked with him on the floor, who saw him in various different venues as a colleague. They loved him as well for his integrity, for his fairness, and yes, as the gentleman from Louisiana said, he could be tough and he could be rough, but he also could be gentle and accepting and open. All of us in this country were blessed by his time on this earth, so much of which he gave back to the rest of us in a form of service in the armed forces and in this House and in his community. History will remember him as its longest serving member of the House of Representatives. But we who knew him well remember John Dingell as a man of extraordinary character, intellect, courage, and purpose. From health care to the environment, from workers' rights to veterans' care, John worked tirelessly over his 6 decades in the House to make sure Congress was doing right by the people that the House represents. And his legislative record of achievement speaks volumes about who it was he believed he was fighting for every day in office. Medicare, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, Clean Air Act, Drinking Water Act, Endangered Species Act, all of these bore his imprint. What an extraordinary record of service and accomplishment. And that's because he was a champion of affordable health care, equality under the law, the right to vote, economic opportunity, and a healthy future for our children and grandchildren. To his beloved Michigan, he was an indefatigable defender of auto workers and their role in the American economy. And John was steadfast in his belief that the best way to serve them and all his constituents was to work whenever possible, in concert with those across the aisle and not against them. We are, after all Americans. We serve Americans. We serve a great country. He believed in Congress, and oh, how he believed in his country. He believed in sitting down together and working through our differences in a way that was respectful and civil. Madam Speaker, I hope that spirit and his example will imbue in us a resolve to find compromise in these challenging times. John, as everybody knows, followed his father into service, 22 years of service. In 1955, in December, his father had passed away, and John was sent by the voters to continue the service of the Dingell family. John Dingell Sr. was a major proponent of New Deal legislation in this House, serving from 1933 to 1955. And John was followed in service here by his, the lovely Deborah, as he so affectionately and lovingly called her. His wife is an extraordinary member of Congress herself, and we are blessed to have her. Debbie is an extraordinary woman, an outstanding member of the Congress of the United States. We stood in a moment of silence just a few minutes ago. I hope that we will adjourn in his honor today. Debbie has been carrying on the Dingell legacy of seeking bipartisan results while remaining steadfast to the progressive values that brought her into the public service. I offer, Madam Speaker, my condolences, as I do to John's children and grandchildren and to their entire extended family. And I thank the Minority Whip for his comments and expression, which demonstrates what we've all said. John Dingell was, of course, a Democrat, but John Dingell was more than that by far. He was an American and a fierce promoter of the People's House and the work that was done by all of the members of the People's House. So I thank my friend. Madam Speaker, on Monday, the House will meet at 12 p.m. for morning hour debate and 2 p.m. for legislative business, with votes postponed until 6:30 p.m. On Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, the House will meet at 10 a.m. for morning hour debate and 12 p.m. for legislative business. On Friday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. for legislative business, with last votes expected no later than 3 p.m. We will consider several bills under suspension of the rules. The complete list of suspensions will be available by the close of business today. The House will also consider House Joint Resolution 37, a war powers resolution on U.S. involvement in Yemen. This legislation will force a much-needed conversation about how to bring to an end to the violence and the humanitarian crisis that we see in Yemen. In addition, Madam Speaker, the House is expected to consider the conference report that finishes fiscal year 19 appropriations. I understand that progress is being made, and I'm hopeful and optimistic that we can have a deal that comes together early next week. Members are advised that additional legislative items are possible. Let me simply say that members ought to know that there is a possibility as well, given the death of our colleague John Dingell and the desire of so many to attend his funeral, that the schedule may be modified to accommodate that effort and that travel to Michigan. And I yield back to my friend.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding back and going through the schedule. And I would share that assessment as well, that if those arrangements are made early next week, I would expect a large contingent of our colleagues to want to be there. We'll all be there in spirit with John and his memory, and as well as our wishes to his family. And as he and I may have disagreed on some issues, he was a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, and we would talk about that. But mostly when I had those conversations with Chairman Dingell, it was about this great institution, this People's House that we both have the honor to serve in, and his appreciation for what this institution means to our great nation. And those will be memories I'll always cherish. As we look to the schedule, I know the gentleman alluded to the conference committee that's meeting. I'm encouraged by the conversations as I talk to different conferees, the issues that they're tackling, and clearly the issue that has been at the front and center of the differences that we're trying to work through deals with border security. And as we look to resolve the differences, ultimately it's my hope that we find a way to properly fund the tools that are needed to actually secure the border. As our experts, our men and women who risk their lives to keep our border safe, have laid out in detail. Obviously technology to help them do their jobs better, the need to increase security at ports of entry, to have more of the drug testing equipment that can do a better job of keeping drugs out of our country. But clearly part of that solution has to be some form of physical barriers, whatever you want to call them, wall, physical barrier, along areas where we have the worst problems. And if I could bring to the gentleman's attention, there was a story yesterday in the Washington Examiner that I would like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record. And the title of that is "Border Agents Just Apprehended Convicted Child Molesters and an MS-13 Member at the Texas Border Where There's No Barrier." This is a Washington Examiner article from yesterday. I'd ask unanimous consent to enter that into the record, if I may.
Without objection.
And for my friend the Majority Leader, I want to read this comment and ask a question about this. Among the other things that they were able to identify as they were able to stop just earlier this week, some of these people coming in, a person with a previous conviction in Georgia for child molestation, a Honduran man with a record in North Carolina showing a conviction for indecent liberties with a child, and another Honduran man with a Florida record that identified him as a member of the violent MS-13 gang. This is just one more example, earlier this week, of people that are coming across our border illegally in areas, and the article notes that this happened in the Rio Grande Valley sector of the southern border on Monday and Tuesday, according to our Border Patrol agents, in areas where there is no physical barrier. And so, as the gentleman himself has said just a few days ago, and I quote, "Physical barriers are part of the solution to improve border security." I'd like to ask the gentleman, when we get this conference report hopefully wrapped up this weekend, can the gentleman give an assurance that there will be money to properly not only secure the border, but to include the physical barriers that are not there in those areas where we have child molesters, gang members coming across our southern border? And I yield.
Madam Speaker, I thank the gentleman for his question. I'm not a member of the conference committee. He quoted me as what I said. We're for border security. I am hopeful that the conference committee reports out a bill that all sides can support, that does in fact try to make our borders more secure. And I look forward to having that bill hopefully on the floor next week prior to the 15th or on the 15th, so we can A, assure that the government is not shut down, and B, that we have a bipartisan agreement on how we can make our borders more secure. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I think we're all going to be encouraging those members of the conference committee to continue the work that they're doing, and that headway is, it seems to be going in the right direction. Hopefully we come up with a bill by early next week that we can vote on next week before we get to the deadline on the 15th to continue to properly fund those other areas of government that haven't been funded, that includes the border security that's necessary, including physical barriers. Shifting gears, I would like to ask the gentleman about a piece of legislation that we filed that we've been trying to get unanimous consent to bring up. And this is H.R. 962, a bill by my colleague Ann Wagner from Missouri. As we saw earlier in these last few days, you had the governor of New York signing legislation that, among other things, would allow for a baby that comes out of the womb alive whether it's from an abortion that wasn't successful, whatever the case, if a baby comes out of the womb alive, the fact that in the state of New York, and now we saw the governor of Virginia talking on a radio show about how that process and procedure would be carried out, where the baby, after it's born alive, can be killed legally in those states. And as we talk about the sanctity of innocent life, clearly there are many different divisions amongst the parties on the issue of abortion. But to many, this issue transcends abortion. This isn't related to abortion anymore. If a baby comes out of the womb and is alive, the fact that in only 26 states there are protections that that baby can't be killed, that means in nearly half of the states in this country, that baby still can be killed legally. I still don't completely grasp how that's legal in America, that someone who's born alive can still be killed and have that be legal in certain states. And so we have a bill called the Born Alive Act that would ensure that regardless of how you feel about abortion, pro-life, pro-choice, after the baby comes out of the womb alive, it shouldn't be able to be killed. And HR 962 gives that protection that it can't be killed. And I would ask the gentleman if he would allow that bill to come to the House floor for vote. And I yield back.
Thank the gentleman for the question. As the gentleman knows, this bill was introduced in the last Congress, in which the Republicans were in his party in charge of the House and the Senate and the presidency, and it did not pass the Congress and go to the president. We will pursue the regular order. This bill, like every other bill, will be referred to committee, and the committee will handle its consideration as the committee sees fit. The gentleman has talked about, or there has been discussion about a discharge petition that is obviously available. We tried very hard to have people we call dreamers allowed to stay in the only country they know, and unfortunately the leadership was against that discharge petition, and it never got to the floor. So many bills that either side may want, some come to the floor, some don't. But this will go through the regular process, and it's going to be referred to the Committee of Jurisdiction, and we will see how that proceeds. I yield back.
And I would remind the gentleman that when we did bring that piece of legislation last year, the Born Alive Protection Act, it did pass the House 241 to 183 in a bipartisan way, with 6 Democrats voting with us to pass that bill to the Senate. It did not get passed in the Senate. However, as you look now, there have been a number of alarming developments that have raised the profile of this issue. When the governor of New York signed into law his legislation and celebrated the fact that in his state you can kill a baby after it's been born, and you saw applause in the legislature over that, it shocked people across the country. It horrified and angered people across the country. When the governor of Virginia just a few days ago went on a radio station and described in detail how a baby born alive can still be killed, can be killed after it's born alive. And it's legal in that state. It's legal and not protected in nearly a majority of our states. This issue has come to the forefront of Americans. Again, pro-life, pro-choice, wherever you are on this issue, the vast majority of Americans feel strongly that you should not be able to kill the baby after it's born alive. And so we can talk about a long, drawn-out legislative process, but now there is more interest and more anger to confront this violent act of murder. How can it be anything other than murder to kill a child after it comes out of the womb. And so I know we can talk about a long, drawn-out procedure. A discharge, I have made it very clear, I will be filing a discharge petition if we can't get to the point where we get this bill brought to the floor in a quicker way. There is a quicker way to do this and address this problem. Again, if you ask most pro-choice people in America, they don't think it's right that you can kill the baby after it comes out of the womb. And so, as the gentleman can talk about a regular order procedure, this bill has passed the House before, and now there's more interest in the Senate to confront this issue. We have the ability to give them that opportunity. And I would just ask if the gentleman would reconsider to move this in a quicker way and allow the unanimous consent motion to go through. If no one objects, we can bring that bill to the floor. And so far as we've been making the motion for unanimous consent, there has been no opposition expressed. They've just not allowed the motion to go forward and be recognized. And so I would just ask the gentleman to reconsider and allow us to at least have that opportunity to try to bring this bill to the floor in the quickest way possible to stop this barbaric process from being allowed anywhere in America. And I yield.
I thank the gentleman. My answer, however, is the same to the gentleman, Madam Speaker. We have a process. The bill has just been introduced. It will be referred to committee, and the committee will have it under regular order to consider. I cannot predict what the committee will do with that bill, but I understand the gentleman's strong feelings. I respect those. And I respect the fact that this is an issue that is current. But again, my answer to the distinguished Republican whip is that we will be considering that in the regular order. And at that point in time, I'm sure that he will be able to testify before the committee, and if and when there's a hearing. And that others will as well, including the sponsor. But we're going to pursue the regular order on this bill and other bills as well.
Well, thank you, the gentleman, for those comments. I would just ask if the gentleman would urge the chairman of the Judiciary Committee to move swiftly to bring this bill up for a vote as we continue to use every legislative tool we have available to hopefully try to get a unanimous consent agreement to bring the bill to the floor. But ultimately, if that is not allowed and if the committee process doesn't work and actually take attention to this in a quick way, then we will go a different route and use the discharge petition route. So we've continued to try to make the point that this issue needs to be addressed by this Congress. The President, in his State of the Union Tuesday night, was very clear that Congress ought to address this issue. And the President in his speech, and I thought it was an incredibly eloquent speech, confronting the challenges we face, but also talking about the greatness of this country and highlighting some of the people who achieved greatness, the three men who stormed the beaches of Normandy, and the challenges they faced to liberate Europe, to keep America free. Ultimately, one of those gentlemen actually went on to help liberate Dachau and to see the Holocaust survivor who was at Dachau and liberated by that very gentleman to both be on the same row of the gallery was a special moment that reminds us of the greatness of this country. And as the President talked about that at the end, he challenged us, he challenged Congress to reach for greatness, not gridlock, but for that same greatness as we confront the challenges that this great nation faces today. This action, the fact that in many states of this nation, it is allowed to kill a baby after it's been born, is a moral wrong that we need to fix. That is another act of greatness that we need to rise up to. And I hope we do in the quickest way possible. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.